Snow drifted through the cracks of the old courthouse roof, carried in by a wind that moaned like a dying animal. Inside, the air smelled of damp wool and kerosene, of fear and desperation pressed tight between four wooden walls. The townsfolk had gathered, boots scraping across the warped floorboards, breath fogging in the cold. They were not here for justice, though the building bore that name. They were here to watch lives bartered like scraps of meat. The benchman, Judge Ambrose Riker, sat hunched behind his desk, a thick book before him though he had no need of its words. His face was carved of stone, heavy with years and the weight of too many verdicts. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, voice flat as he motioned toward the line of children shivering near the wall. "Pick any child you want," he said, the words rolling across the room like a hammer striking iron. The crowd shifted, hungry. Mothers with empty arms, farmers with too much land to tend, widows with houses too silent. Their gazes roamed the line of orphans like cattle buyers at an auction. Some children lifted their chins, eager to be chosen. Others looked away, eyes already dulled, knowing the measure of their worth. Among them stood Lillie McGraw. 17 by the church records, though her thin frame and hollow cheeks told of years spent shrinking rather than growing. The hem of her faded dress clung to her ankles, torn where snow had soaked through. She clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles blanched. No one's eyes lingered on her long. Too old, too worn, too much trouble. She had learned to live with silence pressing around her, the sound of footsteps always moving on. One by one children were claimed. A boy with strong shoulders went to a cattleman who looked at him like a fresh pair of hands. A pretty blonde girl was tugged forward by a stern-faced woman who had lost 2 babies of her own. The townsfolk spoke in low tones, choosing, trading, bartering. Soon the line grew short, gaps opening like teeth knocked out of a jaw. Lillie remained. Alone as she had been for most of her life. Ambrose Riker's lips twitched, though it was not a smile. He gestured again, weary. "Pick then. Someone take her." His words carried no pity, only the desire to be done with the matter. The doors opened. Cold air spilled inside and with it came a man. He moved with the slow weight of one accustomed to silence, to mountains and forests where no eye watched. His coat was rough buckskin, shoulders broad beneath it, beard thick with frost. A rifle hung across his back, scarred from long use. His presence filled the room without a word spoken. Jedediah Colt. Some in the crowd shifted uneasily for they knew his name. He lived high on Timberline, where the pines bent under snow and wolves sang to the moon. Few went near him, fewer still could claim to know him. Stories painted him as half savage, half ghost, a man more shadow than flesh. He stood there, snow melting off his boots, and studied the line of children with an unreadable gaze. Silence fell. Even the benchman's gavel lay still. Ambrose cleared his throat. "Well, Mr. Colt, you've heard. Pick any child you want." Jedediah's eyes passed over the small ones first, the sturdy boy with dark hair, the little girl clutching a doll made of rags. He did not stop. He moved along the line, gaze steady as though weighing something no one else could see. When his eyes settled, they landed not on the strong or the pretty, but on Lillie. The room stirred, whispers hissing like snakes. Why her? Too old. Too useless. No one wanted the girl. Jedediah raised a hand, calloused and scarred from axe and rifle alike. He pointed. Her. Lillie felt the air seize in her chest. She had braced for nothingness, for another passing glance. Instead, she found herself caught in the gaze of a man who looked at her as though she were not invisible. His eyes were gray as winter stone, steady and unflinching. Ambrose blinked as if the choice were a jest. The girl? Jedediah gave no answer, only lowered his hand. The benchman sighed and scratched in his ledger, muttering something about fools and burdens. But his voice faded against the weight of silence. The crowd shifted again, some shaking their heads, others smirking, a few pitying. Lillie stepped forward on legs that trembled. Her shoes were thin, soles cracked from years of wear, and each movement felt like stepping out of shadow into a fire she did not understand. She did not dare speak, for fear her voice would break the spell. Jedediah moved aside, leaving the door open behind him. Snow swirled in, flakes catching in his beard, in her hair. He did not reach for her hand. He did not offer words. Only stood, waiting. She crossed the threshold. The cold bit her skin, sharper than knives, yet for the first time she did not flinch from it. Behind her, the courthouse door groaned shut, muffling the murmurs of those who had turned away from her all her life. Beside her walked the mountain man who had chosen the girl no one else wanted. They said nothing as they stepped into the storm. The town's lamps glowed weak in the distance, swallowed by falling snow. Ahead stretched the white wilderness, harsh and endless, but it was forward, not back. Lillie's breath rose in clouds, each one trembling, each one alive. Jedediah led the way, his figure broad against the night. Lillie followed, her steps small but steady. The sound of her shoes crunching in snow marked the beginning of something she could not yet name. Far behind them, the courthouse stood silent, a relic of judgment and shame. Ahead lay only the unknown. The storm thickened, but in its heart, a strange warmth flickered, uncertain, fragile, but real. And so the unwanted girl was chosen, not by pity nor chance, but by the quiet hand of a man who saw her when no one else would. The snow closed around them, erasing tracks, carrying them into a story neither had yet spoken. The wind cut like a blade as they left the town behind, the last lantern glow vanishing into the swirl of snow. Lillie sat stiff behind Jedediah Colt on the broad-backed bay, her fingers clutching the worn leather of his coat. The horse's breath steamed in the air, hooves muffled by drifts. She had ridden before, though never so far, never into such emptiness. The world stretched white and endless, as though they were swallowed whole by silence. Jedediah said nothing. His back was rigid, his hands steady on the reins. Snow gathered in his beard, in the fur lining of his collar, but he gave no sign of discomfort. He might have been carved from the very mountains he called home. Lillie pressed her face against the rough hide of his coat, more from the sting of wind than from trust, yet in the steady rise and fall of his breath she found a rhythm, something certain amid the storm. Night came down like a hammer. By the time they reached the cabin, Lillie's body was numb and her eyes burned from cold. The place rose from the hillside like a shadow. Logs blackened with age, chimney coughing thin smoke, door bound with iron hinges that groaned when pushed. Inside, the air smelled of pine pitch and ash. A small fire glowed in the stone hearth, fighting to hold its ground against the draft that slid under the door. Jedediah stabled the horse, then returned, stamping snow from his boots. He hung his rifle above the door, shrugged off his coat, and set about the room without a word. The cabin was spare. A narrow bed in one corner, a table scarred with knife marks, shelves lined with jars of beans and dried venison. A wolf pelt lay near the hearth, its glassy eyes staring. Lillie stood uncertain, fingers twisting in the hem of her dress. She had imagined anger, suspicion, perhaps command. Instead there was only silence, heavy as the snow outside. When Jedediah finally spoke, it was plain. "Bed's yours." Her gaze darted to the cot. "And you?" He shrugged, pulling a blanket from a shelf. "Fire'll do." He spread the blanket near the hearth and lowered himself back against the wall. His eyes closed, and with that the matter was settled. That first night she lay awake, the warmth of the bed foreign, her ears filled with the groan of timbers and the whistle of wind. She thought of the courthouse, of eyes that had passed over her, and of the strange certainty with which this man had chosen her. Exhaustion claimed her only when dawn seeped pale through the cracks. The days that followed tested her in ways she had not foreseen. Jedediah rose before the sun, splitting wood in the yard, his axe thudding steady as a heartbeat. He expected no help, yet when she tried, her thin arms ached after a few swings, and the log rolled from her grip. She braced for his rebuke. Instead he lifted the log himself, split it clean, and said nothing. She burned the first stew she tried to make. Smoke filled the cabin, stinging her eyes. She muttered apologies, heart thudding, certain he would cast her aside as so many had. But Jedediah only ladled the blackened broth into a bowl, ate in silence, and left half for her. Each small failure struck her pride like a hammer. Yet with each came an answer she did not expect. Not anger, not dismissal, but quiet endurance. His silence spoke louder than cruelty ever had. The townsfolk were less forgiving. Twice he took her with him down the slope to trade. Once for flour, once for lamp oil. In the general store, whispers rose like gnats. "That colt dragging in a girl near grown. She ain't his kin, I'll tell you that." Lillie felt their stares burning holes in her back. When she reached for bread, the shopkeeper's wife drew it away, offering instead a stale loaf wrapped in brown paper. Heat climbed her throat, shame rising sharp as bile. She wished Jedediah would speak, defend her, deny their insinuations. But he only set coins on the counter, took the stale bread, and walked out with shoulders unbent. Outside, she wanted to scream at him, ask why he bore their scorn in silence. But when she looked at his face, carved hard against the wind, she swallowed her words. Something in his stillness told her he carried more battles than she could name. Nights grew colder. Frost rimed the windows, ice crackled in the water bucket by morning. Lillie mended his torn shirts by the fire, pricking her fingers raw, while Jedediah shaped new handles for his tools, hands steady as stone. They spoke little. Yet in small ways a rhythm grew. He set aside the choicest cuts of meat for her plate. She left an extra log by his blanket when the fire burned low. Neither spoke thanks. They did not need to. Once a blizzard trapped them for 2 days. Snow piled against the door, light vanished from the windows. They rationed food, melted ice for water, and spoke only to keep count. In the thick of night, when the wind howled like demons outside, Lillie woke to find the fire nearly out. She rose, shivering, and fed it herself. Jedediah's eyes opened from the floor, catching hers in the flicker. For a moment nothing moved. Then he closed them again and she felt a strange heat rise in her chest, warmer than the fire itself. The thaw came slow, but with it a test she did not expect. Returning from the creek with pails of water, she stumbled, the ice slick beneath her shoes. One pail toppled, spilling precious water into the snow. Her breath caught, shame crushing her chest. But Jedediah only bent, lifted the fallen pail, and trudged back without a word. The weight of his silence was no longer condemnation. It was something else, something she could not yet name. Weeks passed. The wilderness pressed around them, vast and unyielding, yet inside the cabin something fragile began to take root. Lillie felt it in the steadiness of his presence, in the way he never raised his hand nor voice, in the quiet respect that wrapped around her like a second skin. She did not yet trust it fully. She had been unwanted too long to believe in kindness without cost. But she could not deny that when he left for the traps each dawn, the cabin seemed emptier than before. One evening, as twilight bled purple across the snow, she stepped outside alone. The cold bit her lungs, but the sky stretched wide, a canvas of stars piercing the dark. Behind her, the cabin glowed faint with firelight, a beacon in the endless white. She hugged her arms around herself, torn between fear of what lay ahead and the strange pull of belonging she felt in that rough-hewn place. Jedediah's voice came from the doorway, low and steady. "Best come in. Wolves'll wander soon." She turned, startled. His silhouette filled the frame, tall against the lamplight. For a breath she saw not a stranger nor a rescuer, but the outline of something unspoken, something waiting. She stepped back into the warmth, the door closing on the snow behind her. The fire snapped, bright against the dark, and the cabin seemed less empty than it had before. The thaw came late that year, slow and grudging. Snowmelt bled down the slopes of Timberline, filling the creek with a roar that never stilled. Lillie carried buckets to its edge, skirts dragging in mud, breath quick in the cold air. She had grown stronger since the winter. The thin girl who once shrank from every glance now moved with steadier steps, though shadows of old shame clung to her like burrs. It was on such a morning that strangers rode up the ridge. Their horses were lean, restless, eyes rolling white. At their head sat Silas Devereaux, a man whose name carried whispers through saloons and back alleys. His coat was fine but worn, his mustache curled sharp, his eyes too quick and too cold. He smiled as though the world itself were his to toy with. Behind him rode 3 men, rough-cut, eyes hungry for trouble. Lillie froze where she stood, water sloshing in her bucket. Silas's gaze landed on her like a hook. "Well now," he drawled, tipping his hat. "Didn't reckon to find such a pretty stray this high in the pines." She stiffened, hands tightening on the handle. Words failed her. Jedediah stepped from the cabin then, rifle slung in the crook of his arm. He did not speak at once, only stood with that stone-heavy stillness that had unsettled so many before. His eyes found Silas, and the space between them thickened with something unspoken. Silas laughed, but the sound was sharp as glass. "Easy, mountain man. We ain't here for quarrel. Just lookin' for trade. Word is, you run your traps fat with fur." His eyes slid back to Lillie, lingering too long. "Didn't know you kept company, though." Jedediah's voice was low, even. "You've looked enough." The words carried weight. Silas's grin faltered before twisting sharper. He tugged the reins, his horse sidestepping. "Fair enough. We'll talk again, friend." With a snap of his wrist, he wheeled his horse and led his men down the slope, laughter echoing through the trees. Lillie's heart thudded. She set down the bucket, water spilling into the dirt. "Who was he?" she whispered. Jedediah's jaw worked, but he gave no answer. He turned, walking past her into the cabin. She stood alone, staring at the path where the men had vanished, fear gnawing her insides. The days that followed carried tension like storm clouds. Jedediah spoke even less, rising before dawn, returning late from his traps. Lillie busied herself with chores, mending, cooking, fetching wood, but her mind circled the same question. Why did those men look at her as though she were a prize to be taken? And why did Jedediah's silence trouble her more than their laughter? The answer came sudden, cruel as ice. It was a boy who broke the quiet, Tommy Griggs, the miller's youngest. He had followed his dog to the river and ventured too far onto the thawing ice. His scream carried up the ridge, thin and panicked. Lillie heard it before Jedediah did. She dropped her basket and ran, skirts flying, boots sinking in slush. The boy thrashed in the river's black mouth, arms flailing against the pull of current. Without thinking, Lillie plunged onto the ice. Cracks splintered beneath her, cold searing her legs as water rose. She caught his arm, fingers locking even as pain tore through her skin. "Hold on," she gasped. The current pulled, dragging them both. Jedediah was there in an instant, belly on the ice, arms outstretched. He seized them both, muscles straining, hauling them clear by sheer force. The three collapsed on the bank, coughing, shivering, soaked to the bone. Neighbors had gathered, drawn by the cries. They stood in stunned silence as the boy's mother fell to her knees, clutching him, sobbing her thanks. Then their eyes turned to Lillie, who had risked her life without thought, who sat drenched and shaking in the mud, hair plastered to her cheeks. Jedediah wrapped his fur coat around her shoulders, his hands trembling as he drew it close. For the first time since she had known him, fear flickered naked in his eyes. His voice cracked low. "Don't you do that again." The crowd whispered, but no one mocked. Not now. They had seen. That night the fire burned brighter than ever. Lillie sat near it, wrapped still in his coat, her body aching but her heart fierce. Jedediah mended his traps by the table, hands clumsy as though his mind lay elsewhere. Their silence felt changed, heavy with something neither dared speak. When she rose to hang his coat, their hands brushed. A spark leapt through her, sharp and unyielding. His eyes lifted, meeting hers, gray and steady as stone. No words passed, yet in that gaze lay the first glimmer of something that frightened her more than any outlaw: belonging. The days grew gentler for a time. Neighbors came, offering bread, broth, small tokens and thanks. Children peeked shyly at the cabin door. For the first time, Lillie felt eyes upon her, not with scorn, but with quiet respect. She moved with new strength, carrying herself straighter, though she still carried the weight of waiting for the storm she knew would come. And come it did. At dusk one evening, hoofbeats echoed once more on Timberline. Lillie froze at the sound, her needle pausing mid-stitch. Jedediah set his rifle across his knees, eyes narrowing toward the door. Outside, Silas Devereaux and his men waited in the falling dark, their silhouettes sharp against the last light. Their laughter was low, edged with threat. They had not come for trade. The storm was gathering and both of them knew it. Snow fell thick as wool, smothering the ridge in white silence. The cabin's firelight spilled weak through the cracks as hoofbeats circled outside, slow and deliberate. Lillie stood near the hearth, heart hammering against her ribs, her hands trembling though she held them tight to her skirts. Jedediah Colt sat at the table, rifle across his knees, gaze fixed on the door. He had been waiting for this. So had she, though she had prayed it might never come. Silas Devereaux's voice carried through the storm, sharp as a whip. "Evenin', mountain man. Thought we'd pay you a neighborly call." Laughter followed from the shadows, coarse and cruel. Jedediah rose, slow and steady, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He checked the rifle with practiced hands, then met Lillie's eyes. No words passed, but she understood. If they meant to live, it would be together. The door shuddered as fists pounded against it. Jedediah's voice rumbled low. "Best leave." Silas's reply was a sneer. "Best hand her over, you mean? Girl like that don't belong to a man livin' with wolves." Lillie's breath caught. Heat rose in her chest, a familiar shame threatening to crush her. But Jedediah's face did not waver. He lifted the bar from the door and swung it wide. Snow gusted in, swirling around him as he stepped into the storm. The outlaws waited, 4 of them astride restless horses, pistols loose in their hands. Silas sat tall, grinning beneath his mustache, eyes gleaming with hunger. "You can't keep what the world don't want, Colt," he called. Jedediah leveled the rifle. "She was never yours to want." The first shot cracked, deafening in the snow. One horse screamed, rearing, its rider tumbling hard into the drift. Chaos erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the dark, thunder rolling against the mountains. Jedediah moved like stone given life, steady and relentless, each shot deliberate. One outlaw fell clutching his chest, another's hat spun from his head as he scrambled behind a pine. Inside, Lillie pressed against the wall, ears ringing with each blast. Fear clawed her, but deeper still rose something else: rage. Rage at the years of being unwanted, at men who thought her theirs to take, at the storm that had followed her into every corner of her life. Through the door she saw Jedediah stagger, blood blooming dark across his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, rifle slipping in the snow. Silas's laughter rang, cruel and triumphant. End of the line, mountain man. Lillie's body moved before her mind caught up. She seized the old rifle from above the hearth, its wood cold beneath her fingers. She stepped into the storm, skirts whipping in the wind, and raised the gun. Her arms trembled, but her eyes held steady. Silas turned, startled by the fire in her gaze. Well now. The shot cut him off. Smoke burst from the barrel, the recoil near throwing her to the ground. Silas reeled, clutching his side, his smile gone. His horse bolted, leaving him stumbling in the snow. The last of his men fled, vanishing into the trees with curses trailing behind. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the hiss of falling snow. Lillie dropped the rifle, her breath tearing from her chest. Jedediah pushed himself upright, blood dark against his coat, his face pale but unbroken. He looked at her with something raw, something she had never seen before, fear not for himself but for her. She crossed the distance and knelt beside him, pressing her hands against his wound. Stay with me, she whispered, her voice fierce. His gray eyes held hers, steady even as pain etched his features. You were the only choice I ever had. The words were rough, near broken, but truer than any she had ever heard. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to answer, but no words rose that could carry what burned inside her. Instead she pressed her forehead to his, their breaths mingling in the cold. The silence between them said more than speech ever could. They managed back to the cabin, step by slow step, the snow erasing all trace of the fight behind them. Inside, Lillie bound his shoulder with trembling hands, tears sliding unnoticed down her cheeks. Jedediah endured without a sound, watching her as though memorizing every line of her face. When at last he lay back, the firelight flickering across his features, she sat beside him, refusing to move. Her hand found his, rough and scarred, and she held it as though anchoring herself against the storm outside. The night passed long, but no more shots came, no more laughter. Only the crackle of fire, the whisper of snow against the roof, and the slow, steady breath of the man she had saved as much as he had saved her. By dawn the storm had broken. The sky burned pale gold, light spilling across the valley. Smoke curled from the chimney, rising straight into the clear morning. Lillie stepped outside, boots sinking into the drift, the cold sharp against her skin. The world lay quiet, washed clean. Above, a hawk wheeled wide across the sky, wings flashing in the sun. She stood there, watching, and for the first time she did not feel like a girl unwanted. She felt chosen, anchored, alive. Behind her, the cabin stood, scarred but unbroken, fire glowing within. She turned back toward it, toward the man who had given her not rescue, but a place, a bond carved in struggle and blood. The snow closed behind her as she stepped inside, leaving the storm where it belonged, outside, fading, powerless now.